When you look back at the Reformation and ask if there are ways in which it was incomplete, which it didn't go far enough, in which it didn't reform enough, I do think that there are some things that happened later and that are still affecting the church today that are quite important. I look at them as the natural outgrowth of the principles of the Reformation, but they were not things that were clearly stated and implemented by either Luther or Calvin and the early, what are called the magisterial reformers. And one of the primary areas of reform that I think flows out of the Reformation, but which was not a part of the original Reformation, is the reform with regard to the church and the nature of the church. Luther, and in his own way Calvin, still held the doctrine of a state church. And indeed, in the Westminster Confession, in its original version, you have a state church doctrine. Along with that went the notion of infant baptism. I, with many other Reformed Baptists, think that infant baptism and the doctrine of a state church are hangovers from medieval points of view that were compromised by the Reformation, so that you still had Reformed state churches, you still had Lutheran state churches, and in which every child born in that state, in that principality, was baptized because they were assumed to be, in some sense, a part of the church. And when you have that happening, you have a very clear remnant of a view of the church that originated in the medieval tradition and not the biblical doctrine of the church, which is a believers-only church and believers-only baptism. Now, the doctrines of grace alone, faith alone, Christ alone for salvation, the doctrine of Scripture alone, gave birth in the 1600s to the particular Baptist, the Reformed Baptist tradition, and I think that tradition was the natural outgrowth of the Reformed and Puritan point of view, but it took the Reformation further and insisted that the church is not a subset of the state, that the church is composed of believers only, and that church and state must be kept distinct and separate.